Good afternoon. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, and wanted to touch base with y'all because there's some really important things happening right now, and it gets really confusing. It's confusing for people in Washington, D.C., and I think it's deliberately confusing because, the more confusing, the harder it is to figure out. It's harder for you to get involved, harder for you to take a stand for what's right. So I wanted to try to cut through some of the clutter in terms of a lot of things that are being talked about in DC right now. We have about 4 different spending bills or bills related to spending that are all being debated right now in Washington, D.C. And they all seem to have little different nuances, and they're in different places in the process, and yet they're all important. And so I wanted to kind of break them down for you so you know what's going on, and hopefully provide some information on which ones you might want to really focus on right now, although they're all important. So first of all, there's the 4 bills are very simple. There's a debt ceiling bill. There's a $3.5 trillion bill that the Wall Street Journal actually says it's going to cost $5.5 trillion, but that's a different story. You've got a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and you've got a continuing resolution to keep the government up and running as the federal government fiscal year ends on September 30th. And if the continuing resolution doesn't pass, about 17% of the government will effectively be unfunded. But let's start with the debt ceiling. Very simple. It's a very, very simple thing, and I think it's something which we can dispense with pretty easily. What we have in terms of the debt ceiling is I put up on the screen something that came out from Senator McConnell about 15 minutes ago that I hope will be able to help provide some knowledge. I'm going to come back to this later on, but I'm scrolling down right now and to the part that's important. It says on here, if you look, that right now the Republicans are saying to the Democrats, you want to increase the spending. You want to spend $3.5 trillion. You want to spend another $2 trillion. You want to spend about $1 million increase in spending for next fiscal year. Then you're going to have to authorize raising the debt ceiling all by your lonesome, because you're doing all those things all by yourself and without bipartisan support. So this is not unprecedented. Back during the George W. Bush administration, when the Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, the Democrats did exactly the same thing. They said, you control the levers of power. You go ahead and you pass a debt ceiling increase by yourself, and you own the debt, the increased debt that's going to be accumulated. And the Republicans did that. Senator McConnell has told the Democrats for 2 months, that the Republicans would not provide a vote for the debt ceiling. The Democrats have a vehicle for doing that, and that is the budget reconciliation bill, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the reason they don't want to do it is simple. They don't want to do it is because they don't want to have campaign ads run against them about how much money they're spending, the enormous amount of money that they're pumping through the doors, and they're going to spend without having zero Republican input, at least for a significant portion of it. So the debt ceiling all it is it says the federal government can't have a debt exceeding a certain amount, and they set that amount. The Democrats argue, last year, because of COVID, Trump had all this debt, and since you voted for that debt, you should join us in voting to increase the debt ceiling. Here's why that's a false argument. The debt that Trump accumulated was under the old debt ceiling. We have now hit the timeline where the debt ceiling has to be renewed. So it doesn't matter in terms of this debt ceiling debate what previous debt was accumulated by whom. What matters is the future debt, because that's what they're authorizing, is the future debt. What can't happen unless the debt ceiling is increased is the federal government, the Treasury Department, can't issue Treasury bills. to fund the debt, new bonds to fund the debt. And as a result, it becomes problematic because things that would have been paid for by increased debt don't get paid for. Right now, the Treasury Department is in a process called taking extraordinary measures, where they are, because the debt ceiling ran out a while ago, where they're basically manipulating what they're paying, doing some different accounting tricks to try to make it so we don't bump against the debt ceiling. We will see this debt. They say, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, says that the debt ceiling will be reached about the second week of October, and that's the timeline the Democrats have to act. So that's the debt ceiling. That's what that fight's over. You're going to hear a lot about it, but just understand this is all about trying to have the Democrats own up to the massive amount of debt they're putting the country into through the next couple of things we're going to talk about. So let's go to the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. The $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill was passed with bipartisan support, and it sits in the House of Representatives. It's already passed the Senate, and so it's in the House of Representatives. And Nancy Pelosi has been holding it hostage, saying we're not going to pass this bill unless the $3.5 trillion additional infrastructure bill also gets passed. So while the Republicans were willing to spend $1.2 trillion, and in terms of debt, it's actually about $600 billion in new debt because they're using some money that was authorized to do other things to pay for about half of this $1.2 trillion bill. So they're shifting money that was already authorized and they're moving it around. So it's not new debt from that perspective. So that's the $1.2 trillion. It's sitting in the House. Nancy Pelosi has a problem in that she can't get the AOC wing of her Democratic Party to vote for the $1.2 trillion debt unless the Senate puts across the $3.5 trillion bill now. So it's all so those two things have been linked together. President Biden linked those two things together when, after the Rose Garden ceremony with 5 Republican senators, where he got up and announced that the $1.2 trillion bill had been agreed to and on a bipartisan basis, he then 2 hours later announced but he wouldn't sign the $1.2 trillion bill unless he also had the $3.5 trillion bill on their desk. Confused enough already? Essentially, the two bills are linked. The Democrats have linked them, and the Republicans are saying, if you're going to link these two bills, then you don't get either of them. And so Pelosi now has a political problem in the House trying to get the $1.2 trillion bill passed. That's that bill. It contains about $110 billion for roads and bridges. It's got another $110 billion for mass transit, which in today's age of Uber and future age of self-driving cars is about the biggest waste of money you could imagine. But the Democrats don't care about that. It'll be $1.2 billion or $110 billion or so for mass transit. There's money in there to expand the 5G system to be able to create a secure 5G network that works for the government and others. So there's a lot of different things in there. Bottom line is only about 10% of the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill actually is what we would consider traditional infrastructure. And that's the ultimate irony. It's about 10% roads and bridges and 90% everything else. Having said that, it has passed the House, it has passed the Senate, it's now back in the House, and keep an eye on whether or not Nancy Pelosi brings that bill to the floor, because that can mean one of two things. One, that there's been a deal on the $3.5 trillion bill, and which would be a bad thing. Or two, that Nancy Pelosi has given up on the $3.5 trillion bill, has delinked them, and is now passing that $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill so they get it done. And so that Joe Biden and the Democrats have an accomplishment that they can point to. Either one could happen. Pay attention, but that's how you should read it, and that's what you should look at and try to just to discern what's going on. Then we've spent a lot of time talking about the $3.5 trillion bill, but let's go back to that now and just singly point it out. That is a bill that is basically, they call it infrastructure, but they call it human infrastructure. It's to pay for things like pre-K for everybody down to the age of 2. It's going to pay for a whole variety of the entire, the Green New Deal is all incorporated in it. It's the bill that has the crazy notion that all bank accounts that have at least $600 in them should be reported to the federal government, and also increases the number of IRS agents by around 40,000 IRS agents. Once again, don't know where they're going to find the people to do that job, but they will. But that's what they're looking to do. It has a lot of different strings in it. And the best thing that can happen to the $3.5 trillion bill is for it to fail. Because the problem with as bad as it is, the $3.5 trillion, the Wall Street Journal reports that it's actually more closer to $5.5 trillion. And the number is really infinite because a lot of this spending, once the 10-year period is up, that the spending would occur, there would be this massive push to continue the spending. Because once people get used to getting things, money showered upon them, they don't want to give that up, whether it be a tax cut or it be where people have a tax cut that they've kind of depended upon that then ends after 10 years. Or if it's something which is a spending bill, which gives lots of money to interest groups to do certain things, for instance, pay for the pre-K program to states, and suddenly that money ends, the states are going to demand that the federal government keep spending it. So those are the kind of how those things work. So this is a $3.5 trillion bill over 10 years. The Wall Street Journal figured it out and said it was at least $5.5 trillion and what it would really cost. And the truth is it would embed spending on a permanent basis inside of our budget that would never go away. So that's the reality. The other piece on the $3.5 trillion spend is that most of the money is front loaded. A significant amount of it is front loaded, meaning it's a dramatic jump in budgets of various departments of the federal government that will all designed to get programs up and running now, knowing full well that in 2025 there likely will be a different president from a different party, and Congress will be controlled by the Republicans and not the Democrats. So the Democrats are saying, fine, we're willing to risk our majority to get this done because we're going to put permanent changes into the system, and we're going to put a lot of money into making certain that happens in the next 3 years, and then daring the Republicans to try to undo it, knowing full well from Obamacare that the Republicans won't do that. That even with all the people pushing them, that the Republicans are unlikely to undo a vast majority of what the Biden administration would get done under this bill. So the $3.5 trillion bill has every social program you can imagine being enhanced. It is a wholesale assault on what America is and needs to be defeated outright. Current political state, Joe Manchin has said that he thinks we should push it back till 2022 to try to figure out what to do. Kristen Sinema, it's unknown where she is. There's a couple of other Democrat senators who really should get beaten up on it. John Tester from Montana and Masto Cortez from Nevada, as well as Mark Kelly from Arizona, should all get beaten up on it as well. The reason is simple. Those 3 states are all resource states. They all take stuff out of the ground and sell them to the rest of us. And this bill is an assault on any state, any resource industry, because it is designed to make America completely dependent upon the rest of the world, particularly the Middle East and China, for our continued economic future. And in doing so, putting us into a significantly inferior economic position where we have to bow and scrape to people who don't like us very much. So that's what the bill will do. It's dangerous. And we have down below, I think I've put up let's see here if I've done that. I think I've put up a little thing for you guys to telling you to please go and to our getliberty.org, and take action. When you get there to getliberty.org, it's kind of we've got a button for a couple of different things we're talking about right now. Number one, we've got a button to stop the $3.5 trillion spending bill. Please click on that. Senators need to hear from you. Congressmen need to hear from you. Spending is easy in this town. Stopping it is hard. The natural impulse of a politician is to spend your money, spend other people's money, and let somebody else worry about it down the road. We have to tell them no. We have to tell them no now. This is the time frame. This is when the decisions are made. So please jump into the fray by clicking on getliberty.org and clicking that button and taking the time to let your congressman, let your two senators know that you oppose the $3.5 trillion spenderama. The other button that's on there's a couple of other buttons on there, but the other one that's on there will be on something we're going to talk about just a few minutes. But the last piece of this puzzle, and it's the one that this is how it gets confused. The government's fiscal year ends on September 30th. The spending for the federal government has not been authorized for fiscal year 22. Nancy Pelosi took the House on vacation, didn't come back, and just literally got back in town this week to start doing things. Didn't do her business. And so now we're sitting there in a fight over what a continuing resolution would look like. The Democrats want that continuing resolution to have all sorts of goodies and things in it for their constituents. And the Republicans want it to be what's called a clean continuing resolution, which means it's the same continuing resolution in terms of language and spending as existed last year. So that's the fight. The Republicans' proposal would add money for the flood victims in Louisiana and elsewhere from the hurricane. It would add money to try to expedite the handling of the Afghan refugees who have actual valid reason for being here based on being an ally, and to basically provide some funds to help them get normalized into our country. And so there's some things in there that the Republicans are putting in that are different and above and beyond. But by and large, the Democrats want to have a massive spending increase and have a massive amount of different programs that are funded and different ideas that are put into place and the like. And the Republicans are saying no. Typically what happens on this is they meet somewhere in the middle where the Republicans have a wish list of 50 things they want. The Democrats have a wish list of 172 things they want. And they go through, and the minority in this case controls the ballgame because the Democrats have to get 10 Republican votes in the Senate in order to pass the continuing resolution. So what you can expect to see is a continuing resolution that goes to somewhere right before Christmas, and it will be relatively clean. It will include funding for Louisiana. It will include some funding for Afghan refugees, and it will likely include some different provisions that deal with things that are happening right now that the two sides can agree upon that need to go through, with the Republicans having the veto power because the Democrats need 10 Republican votes to get anything done. So that's the continuing resolution. It's going to get really hot and heavy next couple of days. You're going to hear about government shutdowns. You're going to hear about all that stuff. Recognize one simple fact. Living here in DC, I can tell you that the federal bureaucracy has not gone back to work. They are not working in the office buildings that we all paid for them to work at. They're all working from home. And some aren't working from home, but still getting paid. Any government shutdown will only affect 17% of the budget. And quite honestly, the 17% it affects, because of a deal that Vice President Pence signed off on 2 years ago, The government employees are guaranteed of getting paid either way. So they're not getting paid, so they won't work, but they're guaranteed to get their money afterwards. So for all intents and purposes, a government shutdown is nothing more than a paid vacation for a lot of government workers. That's the truth. It is. So if you start hearing these hardship stories, they are garbage. They're not true. The federal workforce is going to get paid. It's not going to get cut. None of those things are going to happen. You're not going to not get your Social Security checks. You're not going to not get your Medicare payments. None of that stuff is going to happen. The VA benefits will still be paid. All of those things will still happen. What the only thing at stake here is whether or not what the spending levels will be. And a lot of the, and quite honestly, it's in the interest of the Biden administration to get the federal workforce back to work, because the federal workforce is doing their regulations. So in this case, it is in the Democrats' interest to kind of deal with the Republicans and to give the Republicans some things they want. So that's the politics. That's what's going on. I hope that makes sense. 4 bills, they get confused. Sometimes they'll be tied together, but the 4 bills are a debt ceiling bill, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill, or the Wreck America bill, as I call it, and which is also known as the budget reconciliation bill, which doesn't require a single Republican vote to pass, so you know. And then the 4th one is the CR, the continuing resolution to keep the government funded. Those are the 4 bills. Complicated, but I hope that helps you understand kind of what's happening, what people are talking about. Please click below, go to getliberty.org and click to oppose the $3.5 trillion bill. All the dangers in the $3.5 trillion bill. Well, most of the dangers in the $3.5 trillion bill, they're all terrible, but it's depending on how they come out. But the 3.5 trillion one is the one I think you really want to focus on, because that's where the real transformation of America is contained within that bill, and we have to defeat it. It's an existential threat, and the only way we defeat it is by getting a Democrat vote, at least one Democrat vote against it. So that's where we are with that. I'm going to click over and talk about something a little bit different now. Let's talk about the vaccine mandate, what's happening in terms of that. There's a lot of legislative things happening right now. And I think that it's important, and some of them are going to get intermingled with these spending bills, because that'll be a place where some of this language might be able to get passed. But I'm going to talk about 2 pieces of legislation now. Those of you who get our emails know about the Rubio legislation. It got dropped, and so it is now been filed as a bill today. Marco Rubio is doing a bill that would make it so Joe Biden's ability to make it so medicines, ration COVID medicines, COVID cures. As people know, Biden made a decision that he wanted to ration COVID cures because he didn't like the fact that people in Florida and Texas and elsewhere were taking up more monoclonal antibody therapy than they were, quote unquote, entitled to. And as a result, too many people were not dying there. And because those states were not bowing a knee to Biden's other public health policy proscriptions, he wanted to punish the people of Florida, Texas, and elsewhere. And so Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio from Florida, has introduced legislation. It's called the TREAT Act. And I would strongly encourage people, if you haven't already, go on to getliberty.org and send a note to your senators and to your one congressman, urging them to oppose or support the TREAT Act. We've already had over 6,000 emails that gone into Congress on this alone, but we need to double that. And we're working closely with Senator Rubio's office on this. They're working, Americans for Limited Government. I'm in constant contact with his office related to this. Literally just got done sending an email over to them, talking about a couple of different things and strategies that we're planning on employing to pass it. But everything that we do here in DC is dependent upon you. We can't accomplish beans unless you are sitting there telling your members of Congress to get on the stick and stop healthcare rationing, stop vaccine, this kind of the vaccine mandates, stop the rationing of COVID-19 medicines and treatments by the federal government. It's up to you to deliver that message. As you know, from what I just talked about, there's a lot of different issues that congressmen are fighting about right now that they're focused on. And it's hard to get them focused on more than one or two or three things. The only way they get focused is when you get them focused. The way you get them focused by telling them that you expect them to do something. The Rubio solution isn't a perfect solution, but it's about 80%. It does a good job. It's a start at ending it breaks the rationing, federal government rationing, by allowing hospitals to purchase the drugs directly from the manufacturer, which is the way it should be anyway. So it begins the process of breaking the stranglehold the federal government has on medicines and treatments. Because right now, the federal government has said, we would rather have you die than to get a treatment. They've said this time and time again. The solution to the treatment they still prefer, the Faucis of the world prefer, is wear a cloth over your face and stay away from people. And that's their treatment. Well, that was a 1920s treatment. That's not a modern treatment. We have medicines that actually do work. We have medicines that work that don't cost that much. But unfortunately, medicines that don't cost that much have not been approved by the FDA. Monoclonal antibody therapies have been approved by the FDA. And they're being manufactured. And we've talked to the manufacturer, an anonymous person at the manufacturer asking if there's a shortage. And we were told directly, no, there is no shortage. So folks, the Biden attempt to ration this medicine is nothing more, nothing less than an attempt to make it so people who get sick in states that didn't vote for Biden end up dying in a higher proportion than people who get sick in states that did vote for Biden. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. And it needs to be defeated. Get on the website, getliberty.org, click the button, and tell your senators, and share it with a friend. Please share it with a friend. Expanding our capacity, expanding the number of people who know is incredible. I can send stuff cold to 1 million Americans, and they'll say, and when you get stuff from somebody you don't know, what happens? It ends up in your junk file. You pass over it, maybe open it, but probably not. But if you send it to people, they say, I got this from my friend. And suddenly they open it, they take action, they do things, they become part of the winning team. That's why you're sharing this stuff is so important. In fact, beyond taking the action itself, sharing it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and through email, most significantly, is the best single way to get the message out. If you have a Getter account, share it on Getter. If you've got a Parler account, share it on Parler. Share it, because reaching as many people as possible with a message, it dramatically increases how many people take part, how many people talk to their members of Congress, and the power that we can really put into play to get this situation turned around and stop the Biden treatment rationing that he's doing. Last bill that's being talked about. Representative Claudia Tenney from New York. She won by about 20 votes in New York. And the Democrats were desperate to keep her out of the Congress. There was a big fight. She didn't get sworn in until well after the rest of the members of Congress got sworn in. But she's there in Congress. She has legislation that'll be introduced before the end of the week, which would end the OSHA emergency order, and just says very simply that OSHA does not have the power to issue an emergency order related to COVID-19. It's a little bit longer than that, but not much. And that'll be introduced in the next couple of days. Americans for Limited Government has told her that we support it and to use our name in support of it. I will send out something specifically on that a little bit later. probably in 2 days as soon as it gets introduced. But understand, there is a legislative fight about this. This is not, members of Congress are fighting and trying and doing what they can do to try to rein in this administration. Representative Tenney deserves everybody's respect and thanks for jumping into the fray. And Americans for Limited Government is fully supporting this legislation. And we would encourage you, and we will encourage you in the future and provide you a tool to also let your members of Congress know that you support it as well. That will be coming up in the next couple of days. I'm going to let the bill drop and actually get introduced before we move forward with pushing it out. Because right now I want to focus on the Rubio bill because I believe we can get that done. I believe in this fight over the debt ceiling and the continuing resolution, we have a legitimate chance, not a high chance, but a legitimate chance to get that put into the final debt ceiling or final deal on the continuing resolution. I think we can get it. We're trying. Senator Rubio's trying, and we're communicating with a lot of different people in Senate leadership on the Republican side to try to get that done. We have succeeded in getting things like that done in the past. We stopped the federal government from taking over local zoning by getting that exact kind of thing done in the past. We stopped the takeover of the internet by Google and some of those other folks for 3 years by getting that done in the past. So there's no reason we can't get this done. And we are making it a hard push, which is why we're focused on the Rubio bill right now. The Claudia Tenney bill is a longer play, but folks, it's a play that's worth making, and we will be pushing that hard as well. But it's going to be started in a couple of days. So that's what we've got going. I wanted you to be aware of what's happening right now, why it matters, and if you haven't already, go to when you're at getliberty.org. Go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter so you get a daily update on what's going on. You get the take actions hot off the presses as we push them out. And you know what's happening before your neighbors do, so you can spread the word and be really a crier for CRYER, for liberty in your neighborhood amongst your friends, and be able to be the person who's the point of the spear. Because folks, once again, we can't do it without you. You are the critical piece, and you're the missing link in terms of what's happening in Washington, D.C., because you've been dealt out of the game. We're trying to give you the tools so we deal you back into the game and make you the most important part of every legislative decision. Because when America and Americans like you stand up and let their members hear what you think, we win. And when you're silent, we lose, because there's just too many powerful entities, special interests here in town. And you know, the only people who don't have lobbyists on K Street working every single day on their behalf, it's you. Look at us as being your voice to Congress, telling them what they need to do. But we can't do that unless you are telling them directly. And that's just the truth. We appreciate everything you do. We appreciate your support, and let's get to work. We can beat this $3.5 trillion bill. We can pass this Rubio bill. Let's get it done, because some things are important and other things are essential. These are essential. So thank you very much, folks. And this is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government, signing off. Thank you for your time, and we will get with you next time.